is because it has to be person-centered. We have to get an understanding of what makes you tick and what constitutes the current set of behaviors you have that have gotten you to the state of health that you're in. And the only way we get there is by communicating.
The fitness industry, diet-wise, is very restrictive. And that is something I do not believe in. I don't think it's good for our vitality as human beings, because if we are always trying to restrict ourselves, it forces us to live very small. As an entrepreneur, like, you want your capacity to increase, right? And that's what you're talking about, is like your capacity to meet people got better, and your capacity to have conversations and build relationships gets better, right? So I think all of those things are a great reason to get fit.
The fitness industry does a really, really good job of marketing around one dimension, and that's the physical dimension. I have come to find is there are 6 other dimensions.
You're listening to the Real Business Connections Network. Real Business Connections Network. Powered by Balbert Marketing, LLC. Subscribe now and check us out at realbusinessconnections.com. Enjoy the show.
So I'm literally going to put myself on the spot here because you and I had talked about this, Patrick. I tore my rotator cuff. It's been getting better. For anyone who doesn't know, it's basically just the connection between my shoulder and my arm. Couldn't lift my arm over my head. And I was going to a personal trainer. I know you're a trainer. I was in fantastic shape, best shape of my life. Suddenly I stopped going to the gym. I started binge eating. I started being lazy. I knew it was an opportunity to love on myself and not do that, but I did it anyways. So I guess my starting question, guys, is am I a crazy person for letting myself go, or is that normal?
Normal.
That's a great way to start
Normal
the conversation. Yeah, I'll echo what Meagan had mentioned. It's normal, right? And the reason we say that is, one, Meagan and I have been through it in one way, shape, or form. It's part of the human experience. It's a very common thing for us to get in a really good groove and get used to that cadence, get used to that, routine, all that kind of stuff in your schedule. And then, as you're putting it in your own lived experience, life gets in the way, right? And when things aren't clicking in the way that we're used to them clicking, and this is nothing against you, this is just acknowledging the commonalities within all people. It's a really easy space for people to kind of throw their hands up and say, well, fuck it. I'm gonna go all in on eating. I'm gonna go all in on not moving. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the lack of healthy frameworks that are not put in by our coaches, by the fitness industry, by other professionals in the industry, because it can kind of perpetuate a lot of on-off, all or nothing thinking. What do you think, Meagan?
Yeah, it's very typical was this your first time like working with a trainer?
First time, almost a year working with a trainer, 3 days a week, 1 to 3 times a week on my own. It had become part of my identity.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it's your first time, like, it's very common that you will kind of see, the one end of the spectrum, right? Of like where your health could go. Because you're very dialed in, right? Like working out all the time, eating was good. You're living at this one extreme of the end of the spectrum. It's very common that, like Patrick said, when something gets in the way, when life gets in the way, to swing all the way back over here, right? To maybe habits and ways of living and routines that were familiar to us before we started over here. And so actually, I would say, I'm bummed that you hurt your shoulder, right? And that we're over here, right? But at least now you know that a gray area exists, and that's probably where you're going to want to be for the long haul, right? So that's what I always try to tell people, is like, instead of trying to live on the spectrums, like, try to find somewhere in the middle, right? And that's what Patrick is talking about. Like, those frameworks and ways of doing things are not often talked about, because it's much easier to maintain in the middle than it is on either extreme.
So I don't have to go all in on everything all the time.
Oh, sorry, you don't.
You don't, but it's also with the understanding that, from a coach's perspective with our clients, and even for you in this case, it's like, we want to help people get to their goals with as little effort and energy as possible. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, right? Because the fitness industry as a whole does a really, really good job of marketing themselves in a way that's very all or nothing, very kind of boot camp style approach, where it's like, that's almost like cattle prodding people into getting motivated and started, right? So when you hear coaches talk about, well, how can we pump the brakes on this, and to Megan's point, find that gray area or middle ground, it's kind of a paradigm shift. It takes some adjusting, because to your point and your experience right now, as well as your listeners, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you get injured. It's a matter of when you get sick. It's a matter of when you travel. It's a matter of when the holidays come around. So right now you have the lived experience of maybe swinging to the other end of the spectrum, but my hope is, at least with this conversation and maybe even with your coach, it can help tease out a level of nuance around like, hey, what can I do differently next time whenever I do get injured again? Like, what movement can I still integrate, and see your movement and your nutrition more as a dimmer switch that can be brightened when it needs to be brightened, and when it can be dimmed when it needs to be dimmed. But it takes trial and error to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about my problem, because I assume a lot of people have the same problem.
Sure.
And I don't blame my trainer for this at all. So I go to a personal trainer in part because I'm making more income in my business than I ever had.
Cool.
I understand that looking good and feeling good helps me look better on camera, meet people better. Like it's great for business. It's great for my health. But I know personally, since I've been doing physical therapy, that I hardly was stretching. I know I wasn't doing much cardio. And to be transparent, my diet could have been a lot better. So I feel like I was seeking this image of this fit, strong, entrepreneurial man, but I actually wasn't that fit and strong. Like I was high risk for injury. Heart rate variability is not great if I'm like running. Diet's not good. And in simple terms, I probably looked better than I actually was physiologically. Am I the only one who has that problem? Like I'm in it for the wrong reason?
I don't think you're in it for all the wrong reasons, right? Like you wanted to be healthier and you wanted to feel better, is what I heard you say, right?
Yeah.
Because it feels good to feel good. And as an entrepreneur, like you want your capacity to increase, right? That's what you're talking about, is like your capacity to meet people got better, and your capacity to have conversations and build relationships gets better, right? So I think all of those things are a great reason to get fit, and to be in shape and be healthy, right? But I think what you touched on is really interesting, is the means in which you thought that should look like. You know, like it should look like this masculine, like fit guy, right? Which comes from the fitness industry, right? And there's nothing like inherently wrong with that type of physique, but it's like I don't agree with it always being everyone's entry point, or like the thing that everyone should be striving for all the time, right? Because then it can set us up for, and not saying this about you, I'm speaking generally, can set people up for unrealistic expectations, right? And then when we fall short of those expectations, it's like, oh, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I attain this? This guy on this fitness poster can do it. Why can't I do it? Right. So yeah, I don't think you're in it for all the wrong reasons. I just think that, we can, and Patrick and I 100% fell for this too, is like the fitness marketing and like what quote unquote fit is supposed to look like.
Yeah, because it may be good at getting people started, but as you're teasing out in your own lived experience as well as your listeners, and this is even more applicable with it being the beginning of the year, it's really getting a sense of what can sustain you long term, right? So whenever you dive into the gray area of an injury, in your case, it means, oh, I have to adapt. I have to make adjustments. I have to go through trial and error. I have to navigate the gray area. And if we haven't built a skill set in navigating the gray area, not only on our own, but even in the communication we're having with our coaches, which it sounds like you have been willing to lean into working with a physical therapist, it's kind of broadened your horizons, right? Which is good. That's what we want. It sounds like there's some light bulb moments that are going on. And to that point, Meagan and I feel very much so that everybody who's a part of the health, wellness, and fitness industry, in this case, dietitians, physical therapists, personal trainers in this particular conversation, it's really more so a matter of kind of like merging disciplines so that way their clients know what options they have. So that way I could be guiding somebody through a movement program that's more so based in personal training. And if I see something come up within them, I can point them in the direction of a physical therapist, or I can point them in the direction of a dietitian so they know, oh, I've got an entire support system that can help me based on the season of life that I'm in.
Let's dive deep into the messy gray. Before we go, I just want to establish a big part of why I wanted you both on the show. And like, I love you both individually, but you both needed to be here is because you complete each other in a perfect way in terms of not just being like a married amazing couple, but the way that you just talked about it just a second ago, Patrick, the way your skill sets complement each other. So we didn't even do formal introductions yet. Talk a little bit about how those skill sets complement each other and like how you guys fill in the blanks for each other.
Do you want me to do the formal introduction?
Go for it. Yeah.
So, what up, everybody? My name is Patrick. This is my wife, Meagan. She and I are both co-owners of Aware Nutrition and Fitness Coaching, and our primary role is to help high performers say fuck you to the mainstream fitness industry. And what that ends up looking like is I represent more of the personal training and movement and mindset component of our coaching dynamic, and Meagan represents the nutrition component of our coaching dynamic as the lead registered dietitian of our coaching company.
And why are we saying fuck you? What's wrong?
Well, Meagan, I'll hand it over to you. Or I can continue. I just want to continue to hold space for you to say your part.
Yeah. I will come at it from a nutrition lens. Patrick can come at it from a fitness lens. How about that?
Sure.
So yeah, the fitness industry diet wise is very restrictive. And that is something I do not believe in. I don't think it's good for our vitality as human beings, because we are always trying to restrict ourselves. It forces us to live very small. And I don't believe that we need to live small. So we think about our diet. It is always coming from a place of like, oh, I need to cut this out. I don't need to be eating this. It's very shame, blame, guilt, judgment based, right? And so my approach is very different. It comes from an intuitive eating side of things where we get to explore how those foods fit into your lifestyle, because if you help them fit, you're not going to gain weight. You're not going to binge. You're not going to have a weird relationship with these foods anymore. They get to just exist and be neutral in your life. So that is one area that I feel like the fitness industry gets it wrong, because it's all about what can I take away. And it's also very body image focused. And we use our nutrition to fuel that. So that's kind of my piece on it.
100%. So what Meagan's talking about is there's two paradigms that essentially exist when it comes to coaching a client. What's very common is an outside-in approach, right? Which is where most of us start, right? We want to look a certain way externally. So we want to work on the outside components without acknowledging the internal components. What Meagan and I really lean to is a heavy inside-out approach. But the only way we got here was through a lot of trial and error, right? Meagan being a dietitian and getting a sense of how that is represented in the lens of nutrition and people's relationship with food. And for myself, my origin story was I started as a personal trainer in a big box gym, and I got to see how much harm my clients were put under because they were told that, hey, if they work with me 1, 2, 3 hours a week, all of their wildest fitness and health goals and dreams would come true. And early on in my career, I started getting a sense of, oh, it's actually the 23 hours of the day that make the biggest difference and have the biggest impact in people's health and fitness than the 1 hour a day that they're maybe working with me in the gym. So that led Meagan and I both on this path of obviously continuing education and getting a sense of, oh, the fitness industry as a whole is built to make you a repeat customer. It's not built to help you get to your goal and actually have the infrastructure to get there, because it does a really good job of solely focusing on nutrition and exercise only, which through mine and Megan's work, we've come to find that that actually only represents 14% of what's actually needed to get to your health goals. We've been able to identify 6 other dimensions of what we call your deep health that can get you there. And given the fact that, unfortunately, here in the United States, we're on track to having 50% of our adult population being considered obese, it means we have to question the existing systems that are in place that have gotten us to where we're at and be willing to adopt. And this is what's so fun about working with Meagan, a more interdisciplinary approach to start tackling these problems instead of just with exercise and just with diet.
So you mentioned 6 dimensions. Let's clear up the gray, because one thing that came to mind with me is you mentioned the 1 hour at the gym. That's good. In my head, I'm like, I'm spending that hour because my other 23 hours aren't that good. Like, that's why I'm there for an hour. That's better than nothing, right? But you kind of indicate, and for what it's worth, I appreciate your guys' grace so much. I'm going to make myself look bad because part of it's true. And I know that a lot of the listeners have these similar struggles. Like, they feel like they're kicking ass, but it sounds like there could be 23, 20, 18 hours of the day where there's room for improvement. What are the dimensions? Like, I thought my 1 hour was good enough. You're telling me it's not?
I'm not necessarily saying it's not. What we're advocating for is, again, diving into a greater level of nuance. The reason being, we'll use your experience as an example, right?
Yeah.
If all
Please
of your
tear me
eggs-
apart too. That's why I'm here, because I'm speaking on the mass of everyone, because
Sure.
it's uncommon I meet someone who in all areas of their fitness and health feel like they have it mastered.
Sure.
And that's where I am. So feel free to tear me apart if necessary, but go on.
Well, I think the key distinction is how we quote unquote tear you apart, right? Because it's
Please.
very common for most people to expect a fitness or a nutrition coach to just like beat them over the head with shame when it comes to like breaking things down and overhauling things. And obviously, we share a shared understanding of how we communicate around that. So, the main thing here, and I'll get to the 6 dimensions here in a moment, is, and this is the problem that people deal with. And given that this is the beginning of the year, I think a lot of this is going to resonate with your listeners, because if you put all your eggs into one basket in that 1 hour a day in working out and you get injured or you get sick or you have to, like, life's happening. We all have to acknowledge that it's cyclical in nature. If we have all our eggs in that basket, when things don't work out to your lived experience right now, where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves swinging to the, I think Meagan put it really well. And Meagan, don't hesitate to correct me if I'm wrong. If you're striving for, it's this all or nothing dynamic. If you're striving for all, you're more likely to get nothing. Like, if you're striving for perfection, you're more likely to swing to the opposite end of the opposite end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? Okay,
makes sense.
Meagan, do you want to dive into the 6 dimensions, or do you want me to list them off?
You're on a roll, so go for it.
Okay, so the fitness industry does a really, really good job of marketing around one dimension, and that's the physical dimension. And the physical dimension of deep health represents your exercise and your nutrition. What Meagan and I have come to find is there are 6 other dimensions. So we have physical, which is the one. The other 6 are your mental, your emotional. He's taking notes. Your mental, your emotional, your social, your environmental, your financial, and your existential/spiritual. So the reason these 6 additional dimensions are so important is they give you a buffer. And the reason I say they give you a buffer is because we all agree you're going to get injured, you're going to get sick, shit's going to hit the fan. When that happens, You have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, and on and on when it comes to, I might not be able to rigorously exercise as much as I would want to during this season of my life. I've got 6 other dimensions of my deep health that I can redirect my energy towards to help insulate you during that season. And what we come to find with a lot of the clients that we work with, when we focus on those other areas, and Meagan can definitely speak on it when it comes to her guidance through nutrition, is we look at all those other dimensions and how they influence your relationship to food and exercise. How they influence your ability to stay consistent or not. And once you build those in, it takes time to do that. But once you build those in, and that's what we're getting at as far as what we were talking about earlier. You actually don't have to strain yourself as much to get to your goals, because you've got to we talk about it in finance all the time, like diversify your portfolio, right? People don't talk about diversifying your deep health portfolio. Meagan, is there anything you want to add?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay, cool.
Let's dive into 2 dimensions, because first off, we're not going to be able to go through every single detail. So I want to encourage people, how can we follow you, ask you a lot of the beauties of the personalization. So where can we ask you guys a personal question?
Meagan, lead the way.
You're asking as far as getting in contact with us?
Yeah, we want to contact you. I don't want to wait till the end to ask. It's on my mind now,
Yeah, absolutely. Send me a message on Instagram. I'm Ryan_nutrition on Instagram. So yeah, send me a DM. Happy to answer your question.
And I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram handle is Patrick_Ryan Fit. That's RYANFIT.
And I'll put it all in the show notes. I just like to remind the listener, like, you guys get they literally could start messaging you as they're listening right now, and you might literally text back as they're listening right now, which would be super cool. But we talked about 6 dimensions. Let's tackle 2 of them. I want you to each pick one, and what are some of the lies behind that dimension, and then what are the actual truths that you're helping us unveil? We'll start with Meagan. Go first.
Yeah, go first. I will start with emotional health, because that is a lie would be that it is not tied to your physical health or your nutrition at all. And something that I work on with clients a lot is that emotional eating, right? A lot of times there are unmet emotional needs that lead to us eating certain things. And so that is a lie that I see a lot, is our emotional health doesn't matter, and it's not a contributing factor to why I am the way I am, right? Or why I behave the way I behave, or why I decide to eat the things that I eat. So that is probably the biggest one. And then you said 2 lies or just one?
As many lies as you got.
Okay. Let's see what else.
The what not to do. I learned a lot from what not to do.
Yeah.
Let's unveil the lies so we can actually be empowered to step into the proper way of doing things. So as many as you got.
Yeah. Okay. So the what not to do's. Also, I would say just not ignoring it, right? Because that's one of those things that it just builds and builds and builds and builds over time. And if we don't build the skill set to acknowledge what's triggering underneath, it's going to overflow eventually. And that also plays out in our behaviors and why we are the way that we are.
So now the inverse is, what does a good routine look like? What can we strive for when it comes to emotional health, emotional eating, nutrition?
Yeah. I would say if you are someone that you feel like you struggle with emotional eating, whether it's stress eating, emotional coping with any kind of sadness or anything, depression is a big one. Also, boredom is a form of emotional eating, right? I would say the best thing you could do as part of your routine is to slow down, because a lot of times we can get caught up in just the hustle and bustle of the day, and we're not even realizing what we're doing and how that's affecting our health. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to clients and we're going through, okay, tell me what your day looks like, right? And then they're like, oh, I snack a little bit more than I thought I did, right? Just because it's just a mindless thing that we're doing, and we're not really realizing like, oh, I was really stressed today, or oh, like I had a really tough conversation with someone and then I had extra snacks today. So by slowing down, we can actually make those connections between the two, and then you can have a healthier relationship with food as a result.
Mm. Did we miss anything, Patrick?
What's that?
Did we miss anything you'd like to add?
Relative to the emotional component, the only other thing that I can think of in piggybacking off of what Meagan made mention is like the only problems you're unable to solve are the problems you're unwilling to talk about. And there's a lot of, I believe, and I've seen a lot of stigma, especially in high performers when it comes to acknowledging the emotional dimension, like acknowledging that it even exists in their life, right? Like Meagan was talking about. And the only way, and this is what makes our dynamic in coaching clients so much fun, is because it has to be person centered. We have to get an understanding of what makes you tick and what constitutes the current set of behaviors you have that have gotten you to the state of health that you're in. And the only way we get there is by communicating. We don't do it solely by giving you a strict meal plan or a strict workout plan. There's depth and more of a holistic approach that needs to be integrated. Outside of that, the dimension that I figured I could talk a little bit about is environment.
Environment.
You know what I mean? And the reason I picked environment in this particular case is more so due to your listeners listening to this at the beginning of what is now 2025, right? And the reason I say that is using this as an opportunity to reflect back on, we'll just say essentially the last quarter of 2024. In mine and Meagan's world, as soon as October hits, we've got October, November, December, that's the holiday season. And taking an active, open, honest inventory of how your environment has changed. How availability of certain food items, how availability of activity, whether it's at home or at somebody else's house or while traveling, how that has changed for you, and acknowledging that you may not be fully in control of that environment, but you are in control of how you respond to that environment. Because as most people seem to fall into, because we live in an all or nothing world, as soon as October hits, essentially like Halloween hits, an on-off switch hits for people, right? And then the next 3 months are a complete blur when it's like, there's going to be a holiday season again next year, and environment is a huge contributor to that. So your listeners being able to develop an awareness around how does my environment influence my eating and exercise related decisions? And we're not saying become a hermit and don't eat, your grandma's favorite pecan pie recipe or anything like that. It's just getting aware of like, oh, the environment I'm in also shapes the social environment, which is another dimension, but it just influences your decisions, and figuring out how you can play with that dimmer switch with your movement and your nutrition during that time, as opposed to feeling like, oh, holidays are synonymous with falling off track. I'm going to go 3 months of just going ham with eating and not taking care of myself, what then perpetuates that high level of motivation people have at the beginning of the year. And then they push really hard. And then what happens? They get back into work, they get back into the routine, and it's hard to juggle that while trying to go 100 miles an hour with their nutrition and their exercise.
So true. And thank you for the grace, because if you were to tell me I couldn't eat my grandma's pecan pie, this podcast would be over.
It'd be over. We would be ending this conversation right now, immediately.
Meagan, is there anything you'd like to add to this category?
Environment. I don't think so. I think that's a good point that Patrick made.
We could have even started with this, because I'm sure it's going through every listener's mind. It's like, well, these guys are really good together. They're business partners. They complete each other in terms of, the yin and the yang of the part of physical is the outside and the inside of the nutrition. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just really think you guys complement each other well. How does that work out? Because I'll be the first one to admit, like, I fight with my partner. Things aren't perfect, and we're not in business together. So is it complicated being married to not only your life partner, but your business partner? Or you guys tell me, what's the experience like?
Yeah, good question. I think if you're in any long-term relationship, there's going to be turbulence, right? I think that's just a realistic way to look at long-term relationships, but that doesn't necessarily mean that turbulence is bad. It's just an opportunity to learn how to communicate better and understand your partner's needs. And I think that that's where Patrick and I are at in our journey now is like, yeah, we acknowledge most couples wouldn't do well working together. The reason we do and that we can is because we invest in ourselves as a couple and individually. And we have learned what we need out of a relationship and how to communicate those things. And also setting boundaries with each other and each other respecting those boundaries. Those are all skills that we both had to develop individually and as a couple. So I'm not going to sit here and like say it's all sunshine and rainbows because it hasn't been. There's definitely been a steep learning curve, but I full confidence in what we're building.
I want to hear from Patrick, but I want to go in on two of those comments here. One, the working on ourselves, and two, the setting boundaries. I'd love to hear from both of you, like one way that you're working on yourself. And then the second category is one boundary you might have had to set or you discussed together because of one reason or another. So whoever wants to go first, like, how are you working on yourself? How does it help you show up?
Meagan,
Yeah.
you can keep going.
All right, I'll go first. I am working on myself by I go to therapy. I practice a lot of self-care, meaning I bookend at least one day a week where I do nothing and just read my fantasy books and nobody can bother me because I'm just in my own little fantasy world for a full day. And I defend that time. So I'm very big on self-care, not just like a full day like that, but little acts like during the day, making sure I'm actually eating lunch. Thankful to my husband here who helps me accomplish that because without him, I would probably skip lunch. So like those little things where it's like I'm just nourishing myself on a daily basis, that helps create the capacity for me to do my work and to show up as a wife, as a dietitian, and all the other roles that I am in. Yeah, that's kind of how I take care of myself.
What about you, Patrick?
Yeah. So mine is similar in nature. The first thing that comes to mind for me when it comes to taking care of myself is I'd say it's a little bit of a two-parter in that one, I go to therapy myself in order to better navigate my own mental and emotional health, continue to get a sense of what triggers or trash from my past that might come up in conversations and experiences with Meagan. So that way I know how to handle them in as healthy of a fashion, as well as like, I'm the movement guy. I don't have a problem with movement, but I need activity. Like I need to be moving my body on a regular basis. And that's kind of part into that boundary setting of things where a good distinction for Meagan and I, where I definitely enjoy sitting around and reading a book and lounging or rotting as she puts it. However, I don't enjoy it as much, and I enjoy being able to get out, and I enjoy being able to physically exert myself in order to kind of de-stress and decompress. So making sure that I know that I have the space and the agency to do that without any worry from her or how she's going to feel about it is always really helpful for me.
Mhm. Thank you both for sharing.
Yeah.
Part two was boundaries,
Yeah.
something that both ends of it, like talking to my partner about boundaries and then lending the space to provide the boundary. I'm not perfect at either of those. I don't assume anybody's perfect at that,
Sure.
but how do you guys navigate that conversation?
Yeah. I think for me, I view boundaries and I used to view boundaries as like a negative thing or like something that would have a negative consequence to it. But now I view it as, I'm doing this to protect our relationship. I'm doing this as an act of love towards our relationship. And I think that switch in mindset has helped a lot because it helps me, like, it empowers me to set more boundaries because I'm like, I'm doing this to protect our relationship so I can show up in the ways that I want to. And I think those are the types of conversations that we've had because obviously there have been times when I've set a boundary and Patrick hasn't liked it. We've had to like have discussions, about that. But it's always coming from a place of love and never a place of like, I'm doing this, to hurt our relationship in any way.
Yeah. I'll continue to echo that relative to the first question that you had asked earlier, Ben, as far as like navigating this balance as far as being a married couple and running a business and supporting clients, to where running a business together, I feel like, has very much expedited the growing process between she and I, because we spend so much time together and we're making lots of decisions together. It's brought more things up, I feel like, in a shorter period of time, maybe compared to if we were to work separate jobs and not be around each other for 8 hours a day. And then those things ultimately coming up later on down the road in our relationship. So it's definitely been, some would say a blessing, some would say a curse. I lean more towards it being a blessing because it's like, hey, we can just work through this now as opposed to waiting 15, 20 years down the line. And I share a similar sentiment as Meagan when it comes to the boundary setting piece. And for me, I think the key distinction is knowing that the ability to set those boundaries comes from building a space where we both feel safe enough to do so. And I think part of the reason, at least speaking from my own experience, and Meagan, correct me if I'm wrong, Meagan and I, as well as I'm sure many of your listeners and other people out there, view setting boundaries as a negative thing because the individual or individuals, mainly our parents when we were younger, that we were trying to set boundaries with, made it more of a combative experience than a collaborative experience. So we can, at least for myself, there had been this negative stigma around drawing that line and setting that boundary to preserve my well-being and the well-being of my relationship with a family member, a parent, a friend, what have you. So a lot of it has to do with a lot of work she and I have done as a foundational element that kind of helps you graduate to having these deeper conversations around setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm. The more I think of just the term boundary, it almost has a combative underlying, like, I'm going to talk to the wall kind of.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's
a redirection. That's how I like to think about it. Like, instead of a hard no wall, it's like, no, I'm just going to redirect.
Yeah, like I'll give you a good example, which I think ties into my earlier point of as far as like expediting mine and her growth as a couple and as a team. I had been running this coaching program and this business long before Meagan and I met. So whenever she and I, came into one another's lives and we were deciding that she was going to come on board and help, she was adopting in many cases the organization or the lack of organization that I had in some dimensions of the business, right? So then I would have a tendency to have ideas as far as things that needed to be taken care of that day and just like toss them at her. And it was just very free flow out in the open. And I can't tell you how many times she had to remind me, you need to send me an email. You need to send me an email. And it would, in the beginning, I was like, fuck, this is pissing me off. Like, because that's just what I was used to, right? But it was just like, obviously it didn't turn into a big fight, but it was more like, okay. And like, to Meagan's point, it's a redirect. It's like, hey, we can still work on this, but let's build a little bit more of an efficient system in communicating that idea or that thought to me, because I have a different way that I process that information and organize it than you do.
I ran into this with my partner where I had mentioned, like, I live and die by my calendar. I add things to my calendar 6 months in advance. No guarantee I'll be there, but it marks the spot to which I can't double book without looking and seeing something's there.
Right.
So I forget the situation, but I'm like, I need to add it to my calendar. And what Jen said to me is, why do you have to add me to your calendar? And and it's like, because you're a priority, that's why. But there is a riffraff. Like she doesn't want to have to be part of my calendar.
Yeah.
So I don't even have a moral to that story other than sometimes there's a riffraff if you don't communicate here.
Right.
Yeah. There's a difference of like processing information and like what Patrick and I were dealing with. It's very similar.
So what else? Okay, so I'm kind of connecting the dots here because we kind of started with my binge eating and stopping working out and how it's normal. Like we all, if and when something happens, we want a good mindset around it. I think a beauty, kind of connecting the dots between your relationship and where we started, is by taking care of your own physical and mental health. It probably makes you a better business partner. It makes you a better husband and wife, makes you a better friend. This is like in all areas of life kind of thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Meagan, do you want to lead?
No, go for it.
Yeah, I agree. We've heard it before, like you can't pour from an empty cup. And as business owners, as high performers, it's so important to assess your fuel source. It's important to assess the health of the soil of the proverbial garden that you're building, right? Because you can't, and using a house analogy, you can't build a solid, long-lasting home on a foundation of sand, right? So speaking on mine and Meagan's journey, it's very much a matter of like, well, we obviously intend to continue to grow as a business and grow stronger as a couple, but the only way that we're going to do that is by assessing where we're at currently. You can't know where you're going unless you know where you're at. And it helps I think for better than worse, like it helps highlight the gaps. And then you're able to start essentially building a lifestyle based on the support that you're needing to build in, which relative to the work that we do with our clients is so, how do I want to put it? So it helps keep things in great alignment, because then it's like, okay, I can build support around my mental health. I can build support around my social health. I can build support around my physical health, financial, all that kind of stuff. And it just allows you to show up and be fully present with, in my case, with Meagan, in our case, with clients, without worrying about whether or not there are major needs that are not met hanging out in the back end. What about you, Meagan?
Yeah, I would say, to echo Patrick, it's like this is definitely a journey I've had to be on because I am a chronic people pleaser, recovering people pleaser, if you will. And so a big lesson for me in my journey is to prioritize me and how much better I feel and how much more capacity I do have in the business, in my relationships with my clients, in my friendships, in my marriage, like all the different areas of my life. Like I can show up more myself by prioritizing what I do actually need, which sounds counterintuitive, right? The more we pour into us, it sounds counterintuitive, but it is very, very true. And as someone who's been doing that work, it is nice to see the compounding effects of that. But yes, to your point, it is all interconnected and interwoven. And the faster we start to see that and recognize that, the faster we can act on it and move through it.
So now let's interweave. So we've listened to a podcast. We're listening to it right now. We're doing it right now. I believe in integration. I don't want someone to leave this conversation. I want them to feel good, but I want them to look good, feel good, and I want them to integrate what they've learned, even if it's just like a little a breadcrumb of change in their life. I think it's okay to provide an assignment, an integration assignment, that I want to hear from both of you. One thing that's going to be a small step, a small leap, maybe just a breadcrumb that we can take from this conversation start integrating so we can look good, feel good, high energy, good relationships. And perfection's never going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. Well, give us an assignment, each of you, like a breadcrumb that we can get started with today.
I can go first.
Cool.
I always like to, and I do this with my clients, I prescribe self-care. I prescribe it as part of the treatment plan. So prescribing and it could be, when we think self-care, it does not have to be going and getting a massage, taking an entire day off work, which is typically what we think of as self-care, right? Self-care can be putting on the lotion when you usually don't because you're too much in a rush. It could be slowing down and actually having a full breakfast rather than a grab and go breakfast, right? It's these small little ways that we are nourishing ourselves during the day that add up to the biggest stress relief over the course of a week. So my little homework item for anyone listening is, where can you have that small little moment of self-care and lean into it?
And if you're Ben, I'm going to put it in my calendar.
Yeah. If you need to put it in your calendar, that's the second piece. How do you stay accountable to doing that? And for Ben, it's the calendar.
Hold yourself accountable. You as well, Patrick. Assignment.
Yeah, so I'll piggyback on that a little bit, and I'll just bring it down to 2 words when it comes to your meals that you're consuming. Eliminate distractions. Most people, especially high performers, are not present with the food they consume. They're on their phone, you're watching TV, you're driving, you're doing something other than just being present with what you're consuming. And what that tends to lead into is you're rushed while you eat, and you're losing the opportunity to be connected with your hunger and your fullness cues. So that can lead to the tendency to overeat at multiple meals during the day, multiple meals during the week, multiple meals during the month. And then we wonder, why am I 5, 10, 15 pounds overweight? Why is my energy not where I want it to be, etc.? So just being mindful of your environment and how much it may be taking your attention away from the food that you're consuming, and do whatever you can to just eliminate those distractions and actually just be present with your meal, sit your utensils down between bites, drink a swig of water, look around, catch your breath, and see what kind of difference that makes in regards to your relationship with your food and in relationship with each meal that you consume.
So literally our next meal, if we're taking notes like Ben is, we can write down eliminate distraction and spend that meal just present with the food.
Yep. I've always believed it. You're depending on how you navigate your food, both the prep and the consumption of the food. I believe it is a practice of meditation if you choose to lean into that. But the only way that you're going to be able to do it is by assessing your set and your setting.
Tell us one more time. I'm already going to show some love. You guys are amazing, but the listener might have just met you two. How can they follow, send you a DM? You mentioned Instagram. That's the best place?
Yeah, best place is Instagram. We do have a free Facebook community. We'll make sure that's in the that's in the show notes as well. My wife and I, Megan and I, we run a free mastermind training on the second Monday of every month in that group. So feel free to join in there. We source the information as far as what we cover in those masterminds based on the input and feedback from our community. But yeah, Instagram, my handle is Patrick_Ryan Fit. That's RYNFIT, FIT. Meagan.
Yeah. And my Instagram handle is mryan_nutrition.
I think I'm in the group. I'll make sure I join the Facebook group because we didn't touch on this a ton. You guys do this naturally. I presume accountability is huge as well. Being surrounded by like-minded peers that are on a similar journey, that's got to be huge. Touch on that really quickly because I feel like we didn't touch on it much. I think you guys do it intuitively, but isn't accountability like massive?
It is one of the biggest things. And this is where that environmental health piece that Patrick was talking about earlier kind of weaves in. Also, our social health is another thing. If the more we can put ourselves in environments and social situations that are conducive to our health rather than deteriorating our health, we're going to be in a better place, right? So that means, when I first moved to Albuquerque, I knew no one other than Patrick and his his friends and family. But like I joined women's mountain biking groups and met people through my hobbies basically, and that has kept me consistent with doing it. So it's always trying to think about how can we be proactive in putting ourselves in situations that will help foster consistency, because that is the true accountability. And then it won't feel like you're having to be accountable because you're just living your life. And you make some friends along the way, which is great.
A little icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. Go ahead, Patrick. Did we miss anything?
I don't know if there's much more I can add. Meagan kind of hit the nail on the head, is because as you continue to lean into that, you build a lifestyle and you build a support system that allows you to be held accountable in a way that is healthy, that is safe, that is free of judgment, that is free of shame. So then we all acknowledge life is going to happen, but you have a group of people around you who are raising you up based on their just basic standard of living.
Yeah.
I thank you both deeply for being on the show. We have a mutual friend in Brian Bogert. Shout out to Brian. He's been on twice,
Cool.
but the three of us have never gotten together like this. So I appreciated having you today. Maybe we do a round two, because I think there's a lot. We only talked about 2 of the 6 main. What was the term you used? I keep saying guidelines. That's
so it's
correct.
2 of the 7 dimensions. The 6 were the ones that were missing. So the 7 dimensions of deep health, as we call them.
7 dimensions of deep health. Maybe we come back on and tackle 2 more.
Yeah.
Happy to do it. You just
Or maybe I'm just gonna DM y'all and get it straight from the source.
Sure.
Thanks again for coming on the show. This has been fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.